All right, so hello and welcome to this unusual view for me. Um, my name is Nicole, and this is not the typical type of video I do. However, it has been requested numerous times. I am basically just going to do a video where I show you how I annotate, and I'm partially going to bring you along with me on this journey as I work through this. And I decided to use the book David Copperfield. So I will put a picture up here on the screen for you to see what the cover of the edition is. Well, one of the editions of the book is that I have. In all honesty, I have read this book before, but I absolutely love it. It's my favorite book of all time. So I thought if I was going to do an example, why not use a book I've read and why not use my favorite one? To possibly make it easier to see, I have taken the time to print out a PDF version of this. This is in the public domain, so that's how I was able to do that. Partially just because it's going to allow me to zoom in better and have the pages lie flat as opposed to in a book. Normally, however, I do just annotate directly into my book. So let's go ahead and get started. I don't want this video to be too long, but I do want to cover all the different things that I do when I annotate. So the first thing that I do is before I even gather materials, I decide why I'm annotating. And for me, that could be one of three reasons. Either just for my own personal self, so that I can go back, especially if I enjoy the book, and look at all my favorite parts, or if I want to see how I feel about the book at the end, I can look at how many times I liked something versus how many times I had a negative reaction in reading a book. Or I might be annotating it because I just want to have some points to talk about when I do my weekly reading wrap ups or a book review. And then the third reason I might annotate would be either because I'm going to be talking about the book either as part of a book club or maybe a buddy read that I'm doing with someone else. And I want to have things to talk about and know where they are in the book. So let me go ahead and gather my materials. Well, I've already gathered them, they're right over there. But the first thing you will want to do after you have decided why you are reading this book is and why you're going to annotate it is you're going to want to gather your materials. So at the very least, I would say for me, I always have a pencil when I annotate. Now, this isn't a strict rule for me. You will see that everything is flexible, but if you are not sure if you really want to annotate a whole book, if you're not sure if you're going to like it or whatever, pencil's a good way to go because this can erase. Nothing else can. Um, so I start my annotation with a pencil and then I build it in layers from there based on the reason I'm annotating it. At the very least, I am also going to add tabs to my book. It doesn't matter what tabs, you can color coordinate them to your book. You can have them all one color, you can have them rainbow color, whatever. Do what you like, do what you enjoy. I got these tabs from the Dollar Tree. So if you have a Dollar Tree, they sell book tabs. They're in the stationery section. $1.25. They used to be $1. We're not going to talk about that. And then the other thing that I have is I have highlighters that match the tabs that I have in general. You will see that I just have 5 highlighters here, and that's because I just consider these are both purples, and so I interchange them, and same thing with the red and the pink. So that's I only need 5. I technically need 6 because I don't have an orange highlighter in there. Oh well, I'll get one if I need one. The other thing that I will also have is a pen, and I'll talk about when that would come into play. I may have sticky notes of some sort, just depending on how much I want to mark up a particular book. If it's a hardcover book, I tend to not want to write in those because I know they will last me longer. Paperback, you're probably not going to see these. I'm probably just going to be writing all over the page. And if you don't like that, just use the tabs and the sticky notes and a pen and call it a day. And then the third thing that I will also have is some sort of notebook if I am just taking notes for myself or for a book club. Otherwise, if I'm doing a buddy read or doing something where I'm posting my responses somewhere, I will write all my notes directly into that space because why write them twice? All right, so let's go ahead and get going. Before I do anything, the first thing I need to decide is what my color code means. And in general, it means the colors mean the same thing every single time. because I find that helps me a lot, because then I don't have to remember from book to book. But, sometimes books have different things in them, so I kind of let the books tell me what they want the colors to be as well. Yeah, those are two like opposite ideas, but let's start with the ones that are the same every time. I use certain colors for reactions. So red is always going to be positive reactions. So whether it's something I love or agree with or enjoy or made me smile or laugh or just feel good inside. Green is going to be a negative reaction. So, something that made me sad, or I disliked, or disagreed, or flat out hated. And this can be in the story itself, or have to do with the writing style, or any of that. But just any moment that I've reacted to is going to get one of those two colors. Yellow is usually the same thing each time, and that tends to be for themes. I will follow themes or important ideas, but usually themes in a book. Blue, I tend to like for character development. Um, so, not characterization or characters themselves. Um, wow, that's definitely not how development is going to be spelled, but I'm talking and writing at the same time, and I clearly can't do that. Anyway, let's go with it. Anyway, character development. I don't track every single character with a blue tab or blue highlighter because, especially Charles Dickens, that can become crazy town. So I'll talk about how I keep track of when characters first appear and why, but for the most part, if there's major character development in a primary character in the story, or it's a point in their development that I want to talk about, blue's the color for that. Purple is going to have to do with the plot, and especially the plot arc. Again, I'm not noting every single change in the plot, but I'll talk about how I decide what to actually tab versus what I'm doing with my pencil versus my pen versus the highlighters. Again, it's I build layers. I build layers. That's how I like to think of it. And I build layers just based on the tolerance I have for the book and how much I'm feeling like it. There are books where I will start marking stuff in pencils and then end up not annotating at all after a few pages because I'm just like, it's not worth it. There's not that much to talk about. Anyway, is that all the colors? Oh, I didn't do orange. See, orange tends to get left out. And that's because I don't always use orange. So, orange would tend to be either the world, the language of the book, as in the writing style, or I might mark something important that's like, yeah, those are usually the two things because sometimes the world view and the world and culture is more important in a book, like if it's historical fiction, that kind of thing. Sometimes the focus may be more on writing style. For example, if you're reading literary fiction, that kind of deal. I should say that with my themes, I'll also use yellow to indicate important quotes that I want to keep in mind or remember. Um, if it's a quote I love, it's probably going to end up in red. Anyway, so this is my color code. Normally, this would go on the inside flap of a book, and I would show you my annotated copy of David Copperfield, but it's still packed in a box somewhere. So I'll show you a different book at the end of what it looks like when it's fully annotated. For now, we're just going to stick that right there as a reminder of what's going on. All right, so step one that I will do is I will just start reading. I will keep these things in mind that these are things that I want to make note of, and I will just use my pencil to mark it up as I go. So let me just go ahead and I will show you reading the first page or two. I will speed it up while I'm actually reading, but I will slow it back down when I go to make a mark and with my pencil, and I will explain why. So for now, despite all the materials I said you need, this is the only one that I'm starting with. All right, so I'm going to go ahead and read, and I will explain what I am marking with my pencil and why as I go. So I just realized I just marked something and didn't indicate why. So with my pencil, I will tend to just make quick little margin notes, and they're usually going to be sort of emoji style, if you will. So a heart will typically mean something that I love. Um, and I guess I could make that little key here for you of my little emojis because I already know what they are. This is something I love, or it's something that's my favorite. Other ones that I commonly use are when I'm surprised. I'll do this one when I'm shocked. Whoops. If something made me sad. If I feel unsure or awkward about a moment. So they're usually emotional reactions to something. If I have a question, if something's important. And again, the reason I start with the pencil is because it's really easy to erase. If I DNF a book, it's easy to erase anything that I may have marked. If I decide, I'm not going to annotate a book, I can go back and erase any markings I've made just so it's cleaner for somebody else to read or whatever. Yeah, so, okay, let me keep going. So I marked and bracketed a series of sentences that I loved. So I put a little heart there because I love that opening line. All right, let me keep reading. Okay, so I've decided to put stars here and here. I'll talk about why I went back and put a star here. Both these moments, I feel like, are moments that might potentially foreshadow something later in the book. And here he's talking about the question of whether or not he'll turn out to be the hero of his own life, or if somebody else is going to end up being the hero of his life. Having read the book, I feel like this question is answered, and I know how I would answer it. But even the first time I read this book, it was a question, even though he's stating it as a sentence. But it was something that just stood out to me as being a question that I wanted to pay attention to and see if it actually got answered. And so I'm just putting here a little star to know that this is important, something I'd want to come back to. Another moment that stood out to me is that somebody else makes a prediction for him that he's destined to be unlucky in life and that he's privileged to see ghosts and spirits. Same idea. Like, is this actually going to happen? Is this truly foreshadowing? Or are they just going with like superstition and stuff? Now, I'm not going to have all of these thoughts per se as I'm reading and marking it, but I'm just like, oh, that's interesting. So I would mark it. And the other thing I will sometimes do is that when there's a list of things, like they're like, oh, 1, 2, 3, I will sometimes number 1 and 2 and however many. In this case, it was 2 things that were being predicted. Okay. Again, I'm underlining this because it again ties back to this same idea, whether he's, just sort of predictions about what might happen in the book, whether he's going to be the hero of his life. He even talks about nothing can show better than my history, whether that prediction, these two here, well, he's talking about the first one, whether he's destined to be unlucky in life. Nothing can show better than my history, whether that prediction was verified or falsified. And then he also talks about what he thinks about the second prediction. Okay, I did make this little goofy face. I didn't put that on here, but um, I just make that mark when I come across anything that I think is funny or silly. And I will say in my book, I usually don't put this key. Like, to me, these are very clear and self evident. And if I come back to my book and see this, I'm not going to be confused as to what this means. If I come back and see these colors, I may not be sure. So that's why I make a code for that and don't necessarily usually make the key. Anyway, I finished page 1. Let me do page 2, and then we'll come back and I'll talk about the second step after I have made my initial annotations. So my underlining again is just having to do with other details that I find interesting. In this case, I'm not indicating in the margin that I might want to keep track of it, but should we have a discussion, these are things that I could talk about. These two underlines are related to David's father. He was double his mother's age and died a year after they got married. And also in here is included some thoughts about Betsy and his father and how they did not get along because of this marriage. Okay, so I'm going to stop there for now. I'm going to go ahead and go back and show you what the next step would be. Now, typically this next step would not occur until I had read the entire rest of the chapter, which I will show you what that will look like. But for the sake of just explaining it to you right now, I'm just going to go ahead and pretend that I've already read the entire rest of the chapter. So I would continue to read the rest of the chapter. I would be marking things that I had positive and negative reactions to. If I started to pick up on any themes or found quotes, I would start keeping track of those with my pencil. And you can see that the way I do that with my pencil is just making a star here. If I'm not sure about something, I'll just be underlining it if I think it's details that I might want to know or remember. If there's any character development or plot or anything important that I think I want to keep track of with my pencil, will generally just get a star. The only things that will not get a star are reactions. Those will get the little, faces and whatnot. Okay, so that's step one. So far you're like, where does the actual color coding come in? Well, that comes in after I've reached a stopping point, which usually for me, if a book has chapters, I will try and stop at the end of each chapter. If the chapters are super long, like there's only 4 in the 500-page novel, then I will just try and do it at natural breaks or when I'm done reading during that sitting, whatever it may be. So it just depends on how much time I have. Sometimes I will even read, the book all day long, however much I want, and I'll wait until the next day to go back and look at my notes. Or I'll even finish the book and then go back and decide if I even care. Anyway, either way, after some space of time and a break, I will come back and I will look at everything that I've marked with my pencil. And I will do a couple of things at this point. First, I will highlight according to my color code, but not every single thing that I marked. Only the things that in looking back at it, I think, yeah, this is an important point. Either it's if, and again, this goes back to why was I annotating to begin with? So if I was annotating just for myself, I'm going to tell you right now, the only 2 highlights I would do would be red and green because I just want to know, did I like this book? Did I have a lot of positive reactions to it or did I have a negative? And so I would probably only be going back to the red and green moments that I cared about. Now, if I was feeling like I did with this book, where, wow, I'm having a lot of positive reactions, I'm going to go back with my red or pink marker and I'm going to highlight all the moments that I loved that I think I would want to come back to. Typically, those are going to be marked with a heart. So let me go ahead and take a moment and highlight in the sentence the thing that I really loved. Because I can bracket a whole passage, but that's not going to help me at a glance read the one sentence I want to read again and again forever. And in this case, it would be the very first opening line. And then I would look at any other positive reactions I had. This was a funny moment. Most of my funny moments, I'm not really going to come back and want to read over and over again unless it was hilarious. And surprise moments, same thing. Like I don't really want to come back and read that, they suspected Miss Betsy's husband of beating her. Like, but if somebody mentioned that, I would already have that passage highlighted in my book, or if it came up again, that kind of thing. All right, so that's the only thing I'm going to mark in red. Now, I wouldn't typically go through the whole chapter just to find the red things. I would go page by page. So let me see if there's anything else on this page that I really want to highlight. Okay, so you can see out of all the markings I made on this page, at the end of the day, I am only highlighting these few things. Now, if I was the type of person who really couldn't handle a lot of writing on my page, the nice part about doing this layering is I could go back and erase everything else, and I would have a very clean paper. I don't do that, but you could. All right, so let's talk about what I highlighted and also what I just did with my pen. So I went back and I highlighted something that I hadn't marked with my pencil, but that I always do. I like to keep track of the plot arc, and which is Freytag's pyramid. If I remember, I will put a link in the description below where you can learn more about what that is, but that would take way too long in this video. Anyway, I want to mark the fact that this is the exposition of the book, which is basically his birth. And the fact that this is where the story is starting, but he is telling the story clearly looking back, is telling me this is probably going to be a Bildungsroman. I did know that going into the book the first time I read it, but if I didn't, this would be a good indicator. Like I said, I loved that first opening line, so I do want to be able to come back. I do want to talk about that. I do want to flip through my favorite moments, and this would be one of them. And then because I mentioned, hey, there's all these moments of foreshadowing that I thought were interesting and I wanted to highlight. And in fact, I'm going to bracket because I feel like this whole section here is just a whole ton of foreshadowing. So I'm going to put some brackets with my pencil there, but I don't feel the need to do that with the highlighter. I highlighted what I felt like were the two most important parts of foreshadowing that even he in the second paragraph talks about. And you will see that I also marked with my pen that I thought this was some foreshadowing. I did put in with my pen the heart, and just because it makes those words basically pop off the page more, it makes them more bold. And if you want to know what pen I'm using, it's a Uniball Signo 207. I love anything Uniball. So there you go. All right, and then this is where my tabs would now come in place. I've gone through, I've marked with pencil everything that tickled my fancy. I then came back and said, Nicole, that may be too much, and narrowed it down to just the things that I would talk about. If somebody asked me about chapter 1 so far, and I've highlighted those things. And I also on this page highlighted the one quote that I really liked, not because it's necessarily important in the grand scheme of the story, it's probably not, but I actually really enjoy that quote. Let us have no meandering. That is something that I could see like putting on a wall. I would do that. Anyway, now to make this easier to find, when I went through my book, which is helpful when you're in a book club and people are talking about stuff and you want to flip to your favorite moment or something that stood out to you, that's where my tabs come into play. I am going to tab anything that I highlighted. And I like tabbing. Sometimes tabbing will help you realize, okay, that's way too many things. You're never going to be able to talk about all of those things. So it can be another point to narrow down stuff. For example, my exposition, I like to highlight the plot arc, not for book clubs. So if this was a book club read, I probably wouldn't do that. Like nobody's going to want to hear about how this is the exposition of the story. But if you're making a book review, it's helpful to be able to explain how the book starts. So that's where that would come in. This foreshadowing, I think this is important foreshadowing, and this is foreshadowing that I personally want to keep track of. And I don't know yet whether or not it's something I would talk about during my book club, but it is a point that I want to have there. I will say that I will tab my book, but if I'm going to a book club, usually the day before the book club, I will go back through all my tabs and I will pull out anything that I just think we're not going to talk about. So if I don't think we're ever going to talk about the foreshadowing, I would take that out just so that I have, can focus basically. And then on this page, again, depending on the reason I was annotating, I may or may not mark this. If I was annotating for a book club, I probably wouldn't share with them all of my favorite quotes or everything that I thought was quotable. But for myself, I would want to go back through and say, okay, what are some good quotes to take out of this book? All right, so that is how I would tab this. I'm now going to go off camera and read through the rest of this chapter just because then I won't have like a whole camera set up in front of me. It'll just be easier and faster for me to do that. And then I will come back. I will show you my pencil marks. I will show you my highlights. I will show you my tabs. And then I will discuss what to do with and what I do with all this jazz to then either come up with a book review for you guys or for myself, or take notes on it for myself, or post thoughts to Discord or have a discussion in a book club. And I will also show you an example of what that looks like using Candide. Because again, I have no idea where my copy of David Copperfield is. But anyway, here's a break for me to finish reading and no time at all for you. Okay, and I'm back. So it has been a few seconds, or not even that for you, but it is hours later for me. In fact, I need to finish filming this quickly while I still have daylight left. It did not take me that long to read chapter one. I actually left, ran errands, and etc. Anyway, let's go through the whole chapter and see what I did. So you saw me do these first 2 pages. You will note here on page 2, however, that I did go back and highlight more of this section and put it in brackets, as well as title it Betsy Trotwood. And the reason that is as I read the rest of this chapter, this character became more and more prominent, and I realized this is actually a pretty important character, and I have the feeling she is going to come up some more because they're spending a lot of time characterizing her during this section. So I wanted to make sure, for one, that I definitely started out by indicating where she was first talked about, and this whole paragraph is about her. So this is typically an indication that you're being introduced to another, at least secondary character. So I kind of highlighted all of those parts that I might want to go back to and talk about or think about again when I'm thinking about her history or backstory. And in fact, because so much of this is really more of her backstory than it is anything else, I'm going to mention that here. Um, and this is a section that I might actually go back through and erase the pencil marks because I've now highlighted. All right, so not much else on that page has changed. As I continued to go through, I did here put in brackets and title the first encounter with Miss Betsy. You will see, however, I did not tab this because this specific section isn't something that I think I would necessarily go back and talk about if I was talking about her character and who she is and how she's set up. But if I did want to reference it, it is going to pop off the page to me now. And I know that this reference to her would come very closely to when she's first introduced. All right, on this page, I did highlight some things that I noticed at the top here that were repeating. It says you are a very baby, a childish widow, a childish mother. This is David Copperfield's mother, who is talking about herself, but Miss Betsy is the one who called her a baby. And I just thought it was interesting that in this short period of time, this idea of his mother being very young, very childish, even baby like, is repeated. It's an unusual idea, but it's also the repetition that I noticed. And I just felt like by the end of the chapter, I wanted to come back and highlight that. As I was reading it, I caught it and just underlined it with my pencil. This is a section where I called it beautiful. To me, this was just an example of beautiful writing that I would potentially want to come back to. And so I put a little heart there. And when I was going back through to highlight, I was like, yep, this is a passage that I would want to read over and over again. So it got a pink tab. Going on, you can see we have a character named Peggotty who is introduced. I wrote her name at the top, and I also highlighted her name here where she was first mentioned. And again, you will see that there is some more highlighting of this bless the baby and the idea of the baby being connected to mom. I also found this passage funny, but didn't feel like I needed to note that. And again, right now, all I'm doing is just highlighting these sort of reoccurring statements of baby being connected with the mother. And what I'll do is when I'm not sure what the importance of something is, but it's starting to feel important, this is how I'll handle it. I won't tab it yet. I won't write anything in the margin about it yet. I will just make sure that I can go back and find it if I want to. And then down here, I have some characterization or character development. Remember, that's what the blue means. And I titled this Old Wrongs. And if I wanted to be even more clear, I could put Betsy Trotwood. But if I read this, you can see her name right there, Betsy Trotwood. And this is talking about the old wrongs or her own old wrongs. And it's a passage where she is talking about how she herself has been wronged, though in her mind she's not talking about herself, but if you read the passage, you'll know she is. I should mention, though this may be way too late in the video, that this video will have spoilers in it, but only about chapter 1. So if you want to read David Copperfield, read chapter 1 along with me, and then it won't really be a spoiler. But if you haven't read chapter 1 yet, go ahead and read it. It's the beginning of the story. Like, I'm not telling you anything you won't know within the first, 10 pages of the story. So just want to put that out there, though. There are other things that I am catching on this second reading that I did not catch the first time that are foreshadowing of things later to come, but I won't talk about those. So I will only point out here any foreshadowing that I caught during the first time I ever read this book. All right, so continuing to go, other things that I highlighted. Okay, finally, here we go, babyish Mrs. Copperfield. I felt like if I was going to talk about how Mrs. Copperfield is sort of equated with being a baby and an example of what that really looks like or what that sort of symbol of her being a baby really means, this is the passage that I would refer to. But the nice thing is that even though this is characterization of her, I feel like this is going to be an ongoing theme because of how repetitive it is. Usually an author won't be that repetitive with characterization. Like, we would have gotten one description of Mrs. Copperfield at the very beginning that would have pointed her out as being a very babyish and childish character and moved on, and she would have just continued to behave that way. But because it keeps being said baby and child and baby, I was like, okay, there's some sort of weird theme going on here. So that, again, is why it's yellow. And this is where it talks about it. But now, because I've highlighted it before, if I want to give multiple examples of how much this poor woman is being infantilized, then I would be able to go back and say, look, on page 5, they talk about how she's a baby. And on page 4, they talk about how she's a baby. And I would be able to go back to those. But more importantly, if I make a note on these sections, I would be able to just, in that one note on this, list all those other pages where it talks about it. And I'll show you my notes in a moment, and that'll make more sense. Anyway, continuing on, you have 2 more characters who are introduced, Mr. Chillip and Ham Peggotty. You get more characterization of Ham Peggotty. Now, even though he occurred for the first time on the other page, the reason I am tabbing this one is partially because he gets characterized further. It tells us where he went to school, how he was with his catechism, and that he's a credible witness. But most importantly, in my opinion, is that he reported the next day what he saw happening. And this is a question that I always had about this first chapter, and I clearly missed this the first time I read this book, which was, I always wondered, all this is happening before David's even been born. So how did he find this out? And I had my assumptions as to who it was, but it very clearly states here that Ham Peggotty himself reported some of this. So I titled this Informer. And then I did underline a little quote here, like a discontented fairy, because I thought that was cute. And there was something that happened in this paragraph that surprised me, so I indicated that. Okay, so now I have read a chapter and I have highlighted it and I have tabbed what I want to remember. And so this is mainly what you guys see when you then start to see like my books with all the tabs and stuff on them. This is what is sometimes going on inside them. Like I said, sometimes all that's going on inside them is just the tabs. Sometimes it's the tabs and the pencil and the margins, and sometimes it's highlighting. Highlighting is very, very rare, but with my new note taking, it's becoming more common because it does make it quicker to find things on a page and to find exactly what part you're tab is pointing to if you highlight it. But, different strokes, different folks. Okay, now last thing I'm going to talk about is how I take notes on what I've read and why I've started doing this. I have not always taken notes like for fun on what I've read. I did take notes on what I read when I was in college. So I have a notebook, and this is what it looks like. This is just a moleskin, a lined notebook. And I do want to say that this note-taking method is not my own. I will put a link in the description box below to the video that I saw that explained this note-taking method. And I don't color code the way that is suggested in the video, and you will see that very quickly. However, what I did take away from that was how to go from your color coding into a nice note system. Now, if I was in a book club, this is all I would do. Because then we'd go to our book club and I'd be able to look at my tabs and say, hey, here's some things that I could talk about in this book. And like I said, the day before the book club, I'd go through and probably take out things that I'm not going to talk about in the book club. If I was going to be commenting in a buddy read on Storygraph or Voxer or that kind of thing, I would just, comment on each of these tabs in the Voxer or Storygraph or whatever. However, if I just want to take notes for myself, for my own pleasure, for a book review that I'm going to do, or that kind of thing, or just because I want some really good detailed notes because I just absolutely love this book and want to remind myself of all the reasons why, or it's a really complicated story. That's another good reason to take notes if it's a really complicated story. Then I would put it in a notebook. And I enjoy stationery and writing and all the things and always have. So really it's just an excuse to use stationery and take notes and write and use pretty pens and color. So that's another reason why I take notes. Anyway, following this note-taking method that I mentioned, I will link in the description box below. What I will do is for every tab I have bothered to make, I will make a note in my notebook about it. This is another good way to keep yourself from tabbing too many things because you're going to find, I really don't want to write a note about that. And if that's the case, just take the tab out because that means that that really wasn't worth commenting on any further than having it highlighted on your page. Anyway, I did want to comment on all of these things. So for I Am Born, which was this purple tab here that I called exposition, you will see I have it in my notebook as such, and they're just half-page notes at most. And I just do like little bulleted points here. But I did put the purple that is the same color as the tab. I did put the page number. I did have to add page numbers to my printout here, but whatever page it's on, I would put the page number, and I put the same title. Oops, sorry, I bumped the camera. And I put the same title here as I titled in my margins so that they match. And then I just write whatever it is that I want to say about this particular tab and moment in the book. I don't quote the book because I'm assuming I still have the book. And I should show you the first page. The first page that I will do whenever I'm starting a story is I will put the name of the book, the title of the author. If this was translated or something like that, I would put what edition it is and who the translator is, just so that it matches my book when I go back to look at it. I'll put the day I started, leave room for the date I finished. And in this case, I'm mentioning it's my second reading. And this is normally where I would put my color code if I don't also have it in the book. But it's just a helpful reference. Anyway, back to this page. And then I'll just write, like I said, whatever I want to about that tab. In the case of the exposition, because I've read the whole first chapter, I can make whatever notes I want about the exposition. I can even have a little bit of space to add to this if the exposition continues beyond the first chapter, which in this case, I would argue it does. I next have this blue tab that is about Betsy Trotwood. And this is the one that I said is her backstory. And I talk about, wow, what a character she is. She had an abusive marriage. She's living alone. And there's a really quirky first encounter with her that you'll see happens on a different page. And this is where it helps to have that there in the margin. I didn't need to tab it, but I just wanted to mention it in case I want to come back to it. But if I was really going to come back to Betsy and just talk about how she's established, I might refer to both these things, but I only need to tab one of them. And then finally, to give you guys an example, I did leave one tab that I did not write the notes on yet so that I could do it with you. Because I believe I'm going to call this something like Annotate My Favorite Book with Me. So you wouldn't be doing that if I didn't give you the chance. So here we are. I've got this one tab left for this chapter. I am going to indicate that this is a blue tab that I should be looking for. I titled it Informer. I might even put HP. It's Harry Potter. Informer. It's blue. I know it has to do with somebody's characterization. It's on page 8. And what do I want to say about this? Okay, Ham Peggotty. I might want to say what he's like. He went to national school. What does that mean? Might want to look that up. I believe that's like public school. A dragon at the catechism. A dragon at catechism. And a credible witness. Credible witness. And most importantly, this is what I was excited to realize. It says reported the next day that happening to peep in at the parlor at this hour, he was instantly described by Miss Betsy. So he is taking part in some of what is happening, which is how David later finds out. And I don't know that he reports the whole opening. It doesn't make it sound like he knows everything that was happening, but it does sort of establish how David heard about his birth. And there's more that I would say about that, but that would be a spoiler. So that is it. That is, like I said, pretty much all I commented on in that chapter that I wanted to take note of. This would give me plenty of things, more than enough things to discuss with my book club. So if I'm taking these notes just for myself, I would go ahead and make notes of all of these things because, again, I love this book. I like writing, I like note taking, and all of the things. However, I could already tell you just based on this number of tabs, there's no way I'm going to talk about all of these things with book club people. So I would probably remove some of the tabs and just talk about, maybe one thing, right? Like how many chapters are we getting together in? So I might just pick what's the most important thing in this chapter that I want to comment on. So this chapter, if I was going to a book club, might go to the book club with just one tab in it. And it would probably honestly be about Betsy Trotwood. I want to talk about her. Either that or it would be on the whole childish mother thing. One of those two things is what it would be. If I was reading this book just for myself, I would probably only have the pink tabs in there because I just want to know all the glorious moments that I want to go back to. If I'm doing a Storygraph buddy read with you, yeah, you may get me commenting on all these things. I make no promises. It's no holds bar there. But chances are I would probably limit it to maybe just, my one or two favorite passages, probably the mother, and probably Betsy Trotwood. Anyway, I hope that just shows you how your tabs can help you narrow down what you're sharing and what you're going back to frequently. Whereas the highlighting can keep it all there for you to reference. So maybe I go to book club and I just want to talk about the childish thing, but maybe somebody else brings up Betsy. Maybe somebody else brings up the foreshadowing. Ooh, I've got that highlighted, so I can add my 2 cents in on that really quickly too and be that person, or I've taken some notes on it. So maybe I am writing a paper and I need all this jazz. Maybe you need none of the jazz. But you figure out what you need. You can do that. This is how I annotate, and this is how Crazy Me would annotate this because it's my favorite book and I love it. And I just want to sit and soak in it and all the things and be extra and play with pen and paper and highlighters and tabs and throw in some sticky notes here and use my pencil and just have a good time with it all. Do what makes you happy. This is probably way too much, especially if you are just reading for fun. Like I said, if you're just reading for fun, just start with a red and green highlighter or tab or whatever, and just keep track of what you like and don't like. You'll appreciate it later when you go back and you're like, oh, why did I like this book? You'll have all the moments you liked. And if you want to know why did I hate this book, you'll have marked all of the things that you hated and probably even take a note of them in the margin or in the notebook or somewhere. I did say I was going to show you a book that was already highlighted and had some highlights in it. So let me go get that. Here's my current read, Candide, and you can see it's got tabs in it. And I will show you some of what's going on here. And you can see I've got same idea going on here. I started in pencil. I said, thank you. Speaking to myself here and Voltaire, who can't hear me. And I have frowny faces, I have tabs, and I have highlights. And you'll see sometimes those highlights start to overlap. But in this case, I am tabbing just the things that I'm potentially going to mention on the Storygraph Buddy Read that I'm doing with this. And I can tell you right now that I don't necessarily make a one comment for each tab. In fact, I can tell you these green tabs right here was just this section of stuff that I all found like really awkward and was not liking. And I just made one comment in the story graph to the group saying, okay, here's all the things that I'm not liking in the book right now. And I mentioned 3 or 4 different things that I wasn't liking. So that's sometimes how a lot of tabs can end up being one comment, just kind of like how there were lots of highlighting having to do with the childish thing, but I just tabbed it in one place, or I could just make one comment on those multiple occurrences. So it's just, again, whatever works for you. But, if you like writing in your books, and I know some people hate that, sorry, should have warned you at the beginning not to watch this video. That's it for me. Yeah, and hopefully this was helpful and not outrageously overwhelming. And if it was, I'm sorry. All right. I will talk to you next time. Bye.